The Whispered Ones. The letter arrived on a dreary October afternoon, wrapped in a tattered, unmarked envelope that seemed as old as the paper inside. I found it tucked halfway under my apartment door with no return address. Just a single, haunting sentence scrawled in trembling ink. "Are you ready to see the ones who whisper?" A chill slid down my spine. Every instinct screamed to ignore it, toss it in the trash and forget it ever existed. But the words had an unsettling weight, embedding themselves in my mind like a tune you can't shake. That night, I dreamt of whispers, soft, beckoning sounds that circled in my mind, leaving an eerie sense of something lurking just beyond the edge of consciousness. The next morning, another letter appeared, waiting at my door. This time, it contained an address written in the same jittery hand. The address was across town, in a part I'd never visited, an area of abandoned houses and long-forgotten alleys where the city's glow failed to reach. I told myself it was a prank, maybe something sent by someone from work as an elaborate Halloween joke. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Something far darker lay behind those words, a compulsion gnawing at me, pushing me toward that address. Before I could convince myself otherwise, I was driving through the fog, following the twisting roads to the outskirts of the city where the lights faded and shadows clung to the streets. Finally, I reached the address. A dilapidated, almost skeletal house that seemed to crouch against the night, its windows darkened by heavy curtains. The air around it was cold, unnaturally so, and as I stood at the gate, I felt a strange electric pull drawing me closer. I knocked once, twice. The sound echoed through the house, but no one answered. Just as I turned to leave, the door creaked open on its own, revealing a narrow hallway that stretched into darkness. Compelled by a mixture of fear and curiosity, I stepped inside. As I moved deeper, the house felt alive, as if every creak and shadow were watching me. I could hear faint murmurs all around me, whispering words I couldn't understand, yet which stirred something deep and primal within me. The door slammed shut behind me, and I froze, feeling my heart thud against my ribcage. At the end of the hallway, a flickering light drew me forward. I reached a dimly lit room, empty except for a dusty table covered with strange objects. A cracked mirror, a pair of rusted keys, and an old photograph with faces scratched out. And then, just beyond the table, I noticed a full-length mirror leaning against the wall. Its glass was clouded with dust and grime, but something about it felt off. A silent, heavy presence seemed to radiate from it, filling the air with a sense of dread. I wiped the mirror with my sleeve, and as I cleared away the dust, I saw it. A figure staring back at me. It was a woman, her eyes hollow and black, her mouth twisted into a silent scream. I took a step back, but her image didn't fade. Instead, she leaned closer, pressing her hands against the glass as if trying to escape. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear but could somehow understand. "Run! They're coming." Before I could react, shadows began to pool in the corners of the room, twisting and writhing as they reached toward the mirror. They had no faces, only empty voids where eyes and mouths should be. I watched in horror as they grew closer, their elongated limbs stretching toward me. The woman's image flickered, her terror mirroring my own. The shadows reached the edges of the mirror, clawing at the glass as if trying to pull her into the darkness. I wanted to turn, to flee, but my legs were frozen in place. The woman mouthed one final word, "Listen." And then the whispering began. After encountering the woman's reflection, our protagonist realizes they can't leave the house. The whispers intensify, filling the air with voices that seem to have distinct personalities. Some pleading, others angry or mocking, and a few barely audible, as if they're too weak to reach the surface. The whispers carry hints of the house's past, including the lives of those who were drawn here before. all with stories of tragedy and despair. The protagonist finds themselves haunted by visions of the woman from the mirror. Her reflection appears in unexpected places, in cracked window panes, puddles, and even in shadows on the walls. Her eyes seem to follow them, warning and pleading, yet she remains trapped, unable to leave the mirror. As the protagonist wanders deeper into the house, they discover an old journal. This journal was written by a previous resident who was similarly lured to the house by mysterious letters. In the journal, the writer describes how they began hearing whispers, felt watched, and started seeing shadows that moved without any light source. Each page is filled with increasing desperation, the writer's mental state unraveling as they detail the horrors they experienced. The final entry reads, "They come closer every night. I can hear them outside my room whispering. They're waiting for me to listen, waiting for me to lose hope. The woman in the mirror tried to warn me, but I was too late. Now I'm one of them, a whisper that no one will hear." The protagonist realizes the whispers are the souls of those who've been trapped here, forced into eternal suffering by listening to the voices too long, letting them seep into their minds. Climax. Just as panic sets in, the protagonist stumbles into a secret basement hidden beneath a trapdoor. In the basement, they find old, disturbing relics, things that hint at dark rituals. It's clear that whoever built this house performed sacrifices or summoned entities through rituals to trap the souls of those who enter. On the far wall, the protagonist sees the mirror again, the same one from upstairs. But this time, the woman's reflection isn't alone. Shadowy figures press against the mirror's surface, clawing at it, their eyeless faces twisted in agony. The woman tries to speak to the protagonist through the mirror, but now her voice is audible, albeit faint. "You must shatter the mirror. It's the only way to break the curse. Free us before you become one of us." However, the whispers begin to take on a new tone, pleading with the protagonist not to break the mirror. They claim the woman is lying, that she's the source of the curse, that she was the one who began the ritual that bound them all here. They urge the protagonist to leave the mirror intact, to preserve them in their limbo so they aren't dragged into eternal oblivion. The protagonist is torn. They don't know who to trust, and both the shadows and the woman are desperately begging for freedom. As the whispers grow louder, the protagonist reaches a fever pitch of terror, feeling themselves being pulled toward a decision they can't fully understand. Ending. In the end, the protagonist chooses to shatter the mirror, trusting the woman's pleas over the whispers. As the glass breaks, a blinding light fills the room, and the shadows let out a deafening, inhuman wail. The woman's image dissipates, and for a brief moment, there's silence. But just as relief begins to settle in, the protagonist notices something horrifying. One of the shards of glass still holds the woman's reflection, her eyes filled with despair. "Thank you," she whispers, "but you've set us free to wander, not to peace. Now we are everywhere." The room begins to darken, and the whispers return louder and closer than ever. The protagonist realizes, in horror, that by breaking the mirror they've unleashed the whispers into the world, and they themselves have become their new host. Now, wherever they go, they hear the whispers growing stronger, following them into every reflection, every shadow. They've become the new bearer of the curse, and the whispers will haunt them and anyone around them forever. The story ends with the protagonist writing a letter, similar to the one they received, setting the trap for the next unsuspecting victim.